In The Sopranos, New Jersey mob boss Tony Soprano must deal with the issues and headaches that come with being the head of a glorified crew. One of Tony's biggest issues is dealing with the egos and personalities he clashes with, sometimes in his crew, sometimes in his own home, and sometimes from external sources. One such force is Phil Leotardo. Played by Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Phil Leotardo emerges in season 5 after having done 20 years in the can, not a peep. In spite of his advanced age, he slips back comfortably into the role of a soldier, being an efficient enforcer for Johnny Sack in the Lupertazzi succession war. When his kid brother Billy is eaten by an animal, Phil goes on the rampage against the Sopranos, infuriated even after the animal's death, as he is denied the opportunity for revenge when Tony shoots his cousin to avoid him getting tortured. When Sack gets arrested, Phil becomes acting boss, putting the thing with his brother, whatever happened there, in the past, even though there is lingering resentment. After he suffers a heart attack and is visited by Tony at the hospital, Phil decides to start taking it easy in life, stopping to smell the shine box, much like Tony himself after he gets shot.
From now on, every day is a gift.
But real life gets in the way, and his protege, the hairdo, is killed, and Doc Santoro, his main rival for the big seat, disrespects him by eating from his plate and asking about his wife. The symbolism not being missed by Phil, a man well versed in visual. He has Doc killed and becomes boss of the Lupertazzi family, and with a new outlook on life, one with no compromise. A series of failed business ventures and a tit-for-tat violence between New York and New Jersey, mainly concerning serial jokester and occasional ass muncher Vito Spatafore, and the families eventually go to war. Though New York lands some heavy blows, Tony does a deal with Butchie, Phil's number 2, behind Phil's back, which allows them to get the upper hand. Long story short, Phil gets out after 20 years, comes out of the closet, turns into a house, and gets his head squashed like a watermelon.
End of fucking story.
Phil Leotardo is considered something of a joke in the Sopranos community. Endlessly quotable, Phil is basically a walking, talking meme. The mere appearance of his eyebrows sends audiences into a fit of shinebox and 20 fucking years galore. He is also one of the most hated characters due to his stubbornness, his ego, his resentfulness, his narrow-mindedness, always going on about how he did 20 years, and just being a needlessly hateful and spiteful character. But to that I say, no more Butchie, no more of this. Because Phil Leotardo is one of my favourite characters. I love him like a brother-in-law. Not least because he's played by mob movie veteran Frank Vincent. I feel that Phil's character is weighed so heavily under the jokes about him that sometimes we forget there is actually a very interesting three-dimensional character there, whose side of the story isn't talked about enough because the character is dismissed as a joke. In fact, I feel so strongly about this that even before I became a quote-unquote Sopranos YouTuber, I made a video called The Case for Phil Leotardo, my first real Sopranos analysis. That was about 3 years ago.
I like to do it over, boy, let me tell you.
And, well, I kinda am, as this video is something of a remake. Even before getting into it, it can't be denied that the man's one-liners are legendary. He's like a gangster William I consider Phil Leotardo to be the archetype old-school gangster, the quintessential mobster. Now, hear me out. I think the show does this on purpose, as it's there specifically to contrast with the new age of La Cosa Nostra, the ideals of guys like Tony Soprano, which are far away from people like Phil. Tony has always had a love and nostalgia for the old days, feeling like he came in at the end of the thing, the best is over, as he says in the first episode. The old days were the best, back when we had men like Gary Cooper, the strong, silent type. And Phil Leotardo is the final manifestation of Tony's reckoning with his romanticization of the past and the glory days, warts and all. Previous renditions include Richie, fresh out of the can, violent, stubborn, unlikable, and not of much use. Then came Fitch La Mano, equally violent and stubborn, but likable and very popular. These are men of the past, men who Tony would have looked up to and wanted to be like when he was a young mobster, or maybe even as a teenager, struggling in college football with his small hands.
Your father never had the makings of a varsity athlete.
And the final form of this old violent gangster out of the can, out into a world that has moved on from him is Phil Leotardo, a man with 200 soldiers in his family, boss of the much more powerful Lupertazzi crime family. Now you might say, Cine, how can you say that? How can you compare the Shah of Iran to the likes of Gary Cooper? Phil is emotional. He's like a child. He's petty, insecure, and he can't let things go. But that's precisely the point. Tony's vision of the past is a sanitized, romanticized one. He is sucked into the allure of honor and code as shown in The Godfather, one of his favorite movies. But when Tony comes across someone who carries those very same values, he utterly despises them. Add to that, the classic old school gangsters were never smart and suave. Not all of them anyway. The 80s, a period where Phil was in his prime and a period which Tony would idolize, was one of the most violent and brutal decades in mob history. Think back to Boardwalk Empire. Tony would probably love that show, love the characters, but guys like Al Capone, Charlie Luciano, Jimmy Darmody, these guys were egotistic, self-serving and cruel, and had Tony actually come into contact with them, he would have hated them. He would just not be able to get business done with someone like Luciano finding something to be offended by in every sentence, Capone off his rocker on coke, or Darmody throwing people off balconies. Phil is a real-life manifestation of those kind of characters. He lived and breathed omerta. He even nitpicked the way Jersey did their initiations. And in real life, these kind of old-timers are annoying, emotional, narrow-minded, behind the times, and crucially, hypocritical. Tony wants to talk up codes and ethics, lamenting that men aren't real men anymore. But when he is dealing with such a man who has the values that Tony claims he wants in today's mobsters, Tony finds him annoying.
You're a man, Phil. This ain't a lot nowadays.
The Vito situation is the best example. Rightly or wrongly, Phil wants him gone because he's gone against mob values. Rightly or wrongly, Tony, much more business-minded than many of his peers, is willing to give him a pash because of how much cash Vito brings in. They are at loggerheads, and that's because Phil represents the old ways and Tony the new.
Think about the old days. They the old days.
This relates to something I want to dedicate to a separate video, but there's a lot to say about Tony's nostalgia and rose-tinted look at the past. For example, coming to terms with his father not being a great man in therapy took a long while. Tony has a love of old gangsters, but guys like Feach and Richie are a major problem for him. There's the nostalgia, and then there's the blunt reality. Phil is that reality. He's actually a fascinating antagonist to Tony because the same ideals Tony aspired to growing up are the ones Phil lives by. And look how irritating it is. Phil represents the last of the old school dons, for better or worse. He's the last man standing in that regard. And the casting of Frank Vincent, famous from Goodfellas and Casino, may have been an intentional decision in that regard. You gotta give it to Phil, there's a lot to praise. He competently slips back into his role in the family after a 20-year break, something that didn't happen in the DeMeo family. For a man of his age, he was a terrifying enforcer. Yes, he was as hypocritical and petty as the rest of them. He followed the rules when he felt like it, like when he tries to avoid Tony when he owes him money. And there are lines to suggest that Phil has always been a And there's a weird line from Agent Harris where he says that Phil tried to set up an FBI agent for rape. But in season 5, it's after the killing of his brother Billy that he really went haywire. The murder of his brother sent him over the edge, sent him overboard, and even he knows it, as implied when he has his head in his hands regretfully after harassing Christopher's mother, knowing he went too far in this instance. He may not have humanitarian principles, but he does have principles nonetheless. Before that, there wasn't much to note about Phil. And I know people like to go on about how he and his brother were professional killers, and he had no reason to cry about the Blundetto situation, and I agree in spirit, but I gotta counsel. Phil and Billy killing the likes of Angelo Gareppe was ordered by Johnny Sack and occurred within the context of an inter-family succession war. Tony B was a complete outsider. He had nothing to do with this conflict and carried out an unsanctioned hit not ordered by anybody. Within the world these guys live in, there's a difference. Forget Phil's brother, Phil himself was shot at, a made guy, almost taken out by a non-made guy. He was completely within his right to want satisfaction. I mean, his own boss almost started a war over a fat joke, and yet Phil, emotional as he is able to swallow his thirst for revenge on the orders of Johnny Sack when he becomes acting boss, and even keeps the Lupertazzis in shape to such an extent that even Tony is impressed.
I tell you though, he surprised me. He's acting boss, takes care of John's business, plus the wife, while John's in jail. No complaints. It's real old school. I take my hat off.
He's as hypocritical as the rest of them, but there is a level of integrity. Refusing to kill a boss, accepting John's orders to let it go, and a few other things. And the word discipline comes to mind when thinking about Phil. I mean, look at the way he had his family gathered around him, kids putting their hands up to say their piece. It's overkill, but it's way better than Tony's dysfunctional home with the shaved off eyebrows, poppers, and weird sex. You have to consider the human element also of the Billy situation. His brother looked after his family while he was a guest of the government, probably sacrificing opportunities to climb higher in the ranks of the mob in doing so. Now Phil is out of the can and can enjoy time with his brother, and Billy almost immediately is killed, dying in the Shah's arms, unable to say his last words, and Phil is cheated out of a chance of revenge. Obviously, torture was over the top, but he had a right to be angry. He had a right to a lot of things right now. Look how ballistic Johnny Sack went over the Joey Peeps hit, saying he should even go as far as to kill little Carmine's wife.
I should fucking kill him and his fucking wife.
And Peeps wasn't even a made guy. And then there's the jokes about him reminding everyone he did 20 years in the can. He only actually mentions it a couple of 3 times, only saying the exact phrase after Johnny Sack pleads guilty. And it is a long time. If we did that long in the can, we'd be sure everyone knew it, and we'd want our recognition. And it's clearly justified, surely, blurting it out after Sack admits the existence of this thing. Imagine doing 20 years in prison, and then your own boss elocutes. This is where Phil Leotardo's issues are, the reason he has such a chip on his shoulder. Everyone talks about being able to do time for the sake of the family. He actually did it. They wouldn't really. The guys lament how everyone flips, there's no real soldiers left, and as I talk about in another video, I'm sure Tony himself would flip, and Phil has realized this, and he's bitter. What would have kept him going in the can when he could have died of old age? What was he telling himself as to why he did it? The ideals, the codes, the life, or murder, this thing of ours. It isn't just the fact that he did 20 years, it links to a wider issue and insecurity he has. He was truly dedicated to the life, did 20 years telling himself it was for the family. The values and ideology he lived for and did 20 years for no longer exist. Now it's bosses crying at weddings, ass munchers being protected, and him being seen as unorthodox and behind the times for seeing something wrong with it. Bosses seeing shrinks, junkies, rats, just low caliber all round, a far cry from what he was used to. You have to also consider mob life when he went in. He would have experienced the heights of the 70s and 80s. He wasted 20 years, and for what?
To protect the likes of Rusty fucking Millio?
The mayor of Munchkinland? Even Tony would agree with Phil about the state of this thing of ours. Phil got out and realized he wasted 20 years. In addition to the usual insecurities and entitlements Richie and Feech had, that of seeing kids running the show, people making money outside while they ate grilled cheese off the radiator, Phil had to also reconcile the fact that his years of sacrifice and standing for his values were meaningless, that those values aren't shared by the mob anymore. I feel he was less bothered by the lack of recognition for his time in the can, and much more bothered by the fact that people didn't share the same values he did anymore. In his time, very few people became rats, but it seems now it's more likely a guy turns state witness than not. He is bitter and frustrated now, and the constant L's he's taken, or perceives he's taken, the constant compromises, leads to a mentality where he tells himself he won't stand for it anymore. Even things like the Leotardo name change. He's a proud man, and his pride has been constantly hurt, and now he won't take it. leading to his famous compromise speech. I'm reminded of a line he says, "Either it has meaning or no meaning." He's talking about this thing of ours here, but he could easily, on a deeper level, be referring to his time in prison. Either my 20 years sacrifice has meaning or it has no meaning, and by extension, my life. Either my life has meaning or it has no meaning. And for Phil, the life was everything. I'm not saying he should be given sympathy by other mobsters or they should placate to him. I'm just arguing about where he is coming from. In fact, the best thing for this thing of ours would probably be for Phil to quietly disappear in between season 5 and 6 because he can be too volatile to keep around. And as boss, he took everything personal and wasn't fit to lead a family in the 21st century. He's emotional because he has a Ginny Sack level of weight on his mind. Honestly, he would probably have benefited from seeing a therapist like Dr. Melfi to reconcile his internal issues. I haven't even talked about him supposedly being in the closet, which I have done in another video. He couldn't let things go, just accept things the way they are, like Angelo, who was the most mentally sound of the old guys who came out of the can. Even Angelo seemed like he got a little bit pissed when Tony brought up the possibility of him being boss.
Things happen how they happen.
Suggesting even he has internal resentment, but put it past him and is now content. You have to see things from Phil's point of view to see he's more complex than he's given credit for. The Vito situation, for example. Phil's been in prison for 20 years. He would have seen things, maybe even done things that he now feels insecure about. Or maybe he is just bamboozled and sickened that a free man out of the can spends his time catching, not pitching, which infuriates him after what he did in the can. Then there's the 47 years old, just a kid line, which we like to make fun out of, but 20 years ago, Billy was 27 years old. A lot of convicts talk about how time seems to shoot past them while they're in the can. Phil's life pretty much skipped 20 years and he's playing catch up. He would still see Billy as that 27-year-old kid, making him all the more furious when Long John Silver takes him out. Now that he's seen what kind of world he has stepped into, Phil is unsure of those around him. He feels he's been tested and has earned a level of respect. His lack of respect to Tony is multifaceted, linked to thinking of Jersey as a glorified crew, but Phil also feels Tony hasn't made his bones, so to speak, by specifically bringing him up not doing serious time in the can. Plus, he piles on reasons for killing Tony, like stepping over his uncle, Jersey's lack of standards, like when he says there's no shine box on the table. It shows he still has to justify killing a boss to himself, because it goes against his values, even though the two men have history. Tony represents everything wrong with the mafia today, in his eyes at least. So if you're someone who dismisses Phil as a joke, I hope this video has maybe given you food for thought. What do you think of Phil Leotardo? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.